Linda from the Denton Black Film Festival will be hosting tonight's program. And Linda has been really instrumental in making Denton a home for African American films. She's been doing more than just a festival. There are many things that go on there, and they're really active. And so, Linda, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Bart. Well, on behalf of the Denton Black Film Festival, we're really delighted to be co-hosting with Dallas Video Fest and Video Association of Dallas tonight for this, what we think is a really important conversation. For those that don't know about the Denton Black Film Festival, though, I just want to say that we're in our 7th year, and our mission is to share Black culture and to build community. We consider ourselves a cultural festival, and while film is our heart, there are other elements of storytelling, such as art, music, comedy, spoken word, music, that are all part of our festival. And we have a DBFF Institute that also puts on workshops and panels. But we want to get to the film tonight. And as our moderator tonight, I've asked Michelle Redmond if she would kind of moderate our conversation tonight. Now, Michelle is a very interesting person. She has an MFA from SMU in cinema and television. We were talking earlier, she's been a senior lecturer at the University of North Texas in journalism and media arts. She's been a broadcast news reporter, executive producer. She's worked with a lot of different companies like Food Network, Discovery Studios, National Geographic Channel. She's also was a freelance field producer for the Oprah Winfrey Show. She's award-winning. She has 4 national Telly Awards and a Heartland Emmy. She's currently freelancing and a writer. She's here in Dallas. And I'm going to add that we're so pleased at DBFF to have her on the team this year. She's going to be working with us and helping us with DBF 2021. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Michelle. Enough said.
Well, thank you, Linda. It's obvious, obviously I'm a very old person for all the things that I've done. So let me introduce Jasmine Jones, who is the film curator. Well, first of all, she's a filmmaker and the film curator for the Houston Museum of African American Culture. And Jasmine is right there looking very pristine. Thank goodness she's not in Houston right now because there's a storm going on, but she's in a safe place. So it's nice to meet Jasmine. Also, you're involved with the LGBTQ Film Festival and the Houston Cinema Arts Festival. And in addition to film curation, you've led regional marketing campaigns for major motion pictures like Straight Outta Compton, The Jungle Book, Peanuts, the movie, The Boss, and many others. Welcome, welcome. And also I'd like to welcome Joyce King. I roped her into this because she can't say no to me because we're very good friends and have been for many years. But Joyce King, longtime radio broadcaster, but you might also know her as the author of an incredible book, Hate Crime, the story of a dragging in Jasper, Texas. You all probably remember that horrific crime done by 3 white nationalists. And Joyce went down to Jasper and did the story. It's amazing. It's amazing. She also wrote a book called Exonerated, A Brief and Dangerous Freedom. And I have to say, I've had the pleasure of being allowed to read her screenplay that she's shopping around right now. It's called After Oprah and the Love Affair. It's really good. So we've just got to get somebody to sign on and spend millions of dollars and help her put it together. Okay, so we're going to talk about the film 13th. I don't know about you, but I had kind of a few nightmares. I mean, this is so gritty and real, and it's not fiction. This is the real deal that I just had no idea. So before I toss it out for questions, let me just read to you what the 13th Amendment actually says, because that's what this movie is built around. So the 13th Amendment to our Constitution says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So in other words, you can't be a slave or put in involuntary servitude unless you've been convicted of a crime. And then it's a whole nother deal. So that's the premise of the film that Ava DuVernay wrote, directed, and produced. And it is quite the film. So I wanted to turn over to questions, but right away I have to just say, what a surprise last night at the Republican National Convention that the president surprised John Ponder with a surprise clemency. He was, I think, convicted and served time as a bank robber or something like that. But anyway, he's been working for years on a program to help people who are transitioning from having been a prisoner into mainstream life. And the president gave him a full pardon yesterday. And I don't think he knew it was coming. Anyway, so first question I have for Bart and Linda and Jasmine and Joyce would be your reaction, your visceral reaction to this really important film. What did you think? Bart, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, it's really kind of interesting that the film sort of traces back a lot of the issues to a film. So this is a film talking about another film,
yes,
and how that film has implanted images in our head. And hopefully this film can turn around and be the anti-Birth of a Nation film and can be really kind of useful.
Maybe I'll be back. I'll be right back.
And so that was sort of my first thought, and I really didn't sort of connect the dots. We all knew the Birth of a Nation was a problem, but connecting that sense to that one little escape hatch, and then how they were able to use that and the images from Birth of a Nation to put people in jail, which would essentially are taking away their freedom. And it's just a way of continuing slavery. I thought it was brilliant, but it's so brilliantly done. And of course, the other obvious thing to say, as you mentioned, is how much this is resonating, as well as from what you were talking about in terms of releasing them. If you look at what was going on back, they're talking about with Nixon, which they made a big deal about, and trying to make this whole thing about the riots in 1968, about racial issues, and then cities having riots, and then, we're going to be the people that are going to make this good, and we're going to scare you to death. And this is happening. This is happening probably as we are speaking. He is probably getting up and saying more things about this. It's from the very same playbook.
Yeah, the law and order president. When I saw Nixon saying that, and we know that this president just said that, I think he was standing in the Rose Garden, it just gave me chills, because you see the parallel. Nixon hated hippies and the anti-Vietnam movement and Black folks. That was it. Pretty simple. All right, Jasmine, what were your thoughts about the film after you saw it?
Yeah, my reaction is it's always kind of the same when I see films like this, because it is so personal. It's political, but it's personal because when we say Black Lives Matter, these are actual people. It's my life, it's my brother's life, it's, co-workers, cousins, etc. So it's always very upsetting, it's frustrating. And to your point about the parallels, I mean, it is happening today. We're protesting and fighting against things that have happened during my great-grandparents' lifetime.
Yeah.
And it doesn't end, it just evolves. It's slavery by another name, essentially. It's reformed. And so it's frustrating to, I mean, I'm happy for one, that documentaries like this, and specifically the 13th, exist, because it's shedding a light, because there are a lot of people who aren't aware of that little loophole. They're not aware of Birth of a Nation and its impact on, you know, perpetuating racist stereotypes and policies, you know. So it's great that we have this information available, but then it's also pretty angering to know that these things are still, you know, happening today. So.
Yeah, history is repeating itself, and that's not a good thing. Joyce, where are you, and what were your thoughts about this film?
I thought it was brilliantly done. It was very moving and very hard for me to watch, because I've done work with the Innocence Project, worked with several exonerees around the state of Texas. I've worked with exonerees in other states, and it just reminded me of how we over-incarcerate. And I love that this was a history lesson. This was a way to teach people that slavery never ended. It simply evolved, and it continues to evolve. So we go from slavery to convict leasing, and it kept graduating. And finally, here we are today at mass incarceration, which is slavery. And I thought she did a brilliant job in explaining to everyone watching, it's not that hard. This is it. This is what we have to solve.
Well, I don't think I had ever put it together. Linda, I want your thoughts, Linda, but I just wanted to say, I don't think I ever actually put it together that after the Civil War, after the 13th Amendment, and we, you know, Black folks are granted this freedom, and I never paid attention to this, except criminals, that the South needed to be rehabilitated or restored. And well, who's going to do that? Well, if slaves are free, then we've got to get these Black folks back in the fields doing this labor. We're not going to pay them. So I'll arrest you for vagrancy. I'll arrest you for standing still too long, whatever it took, just to, you know, the chain gang, to get folks together and be free labor as prisoners, and rebuild the South. And I just feel stupid. I never put that all together. Boy, was it really clear with the way Ava set it up for us to understand. Southerners were not about to, you know, get their hands dirty, or Southern whites. So Linda, what were your thoughts? Is Linda there?
Linda,
you're on mute.
Oh, okay.
You have to unmute.
Here we go. Okay, actually, I've actually seen the film a total of 3 times.
Wow.
And each time something different maybe resonates with me a little bit more. I understand, because I too was not familiar when I saw it the first time a few years ago.
Yeah.
About the 13th Amendment.
Yeah.
So it was very startling to see that exception.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it gave you an opportunity to see kind of where we are now, why we're where we are now.
Yeah.
So it just, I also listened to Oprah, and Oprah has a conversation with Ava DuVernay that's also on Netflix. So if you haven't seen that, I'd encourage you to see it. It's always good to get her perspective, which was kind of a hopeful one, that we can change, or something can happen if the will of the people is that it will happen.
I have pulled a couple of quotes from Ava about the film. One is, we're giving you 150 years of oppression in 100 minutes. The film was 150 years in the making. And the other quote from Ava, I think we can all talk about plea bargains by themselves. We can talk about the Black codes and Reconstruction by itself. We can talk about Jim Crow by itself. But when you line them up and put them all side by side, that's what the film does. And you think, Lord have mercy, look at this picture. Look where we are.
Yes.
Well, one of the tropes that is so upsetting that we see thanks to Birth of a Nation and the after effects of all of that is that Black men will infiltrate society, and they'll rape white women and burglarize and take all the good stuff. And that trope, because of Birth of a Nation and of course Woodrow Wilson, let me see the quote I pulled from him. He said this was history written like lightning.
Written
Like
with lightning.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson didn't help matters, but then, you know, he was born racist or he was raised racist or whatever. One of the things, oh, and of course the resurgence of KKK. Was anybody surprised that Birth of a Nation and KKK were really on the same track or the same path after Birth of a Nation?
Well, one of the things I didn't know was that the cross burning came from the movie.
From the movie, I know.
Which is
Thanks
just
so
like
much.
insane, you know.
Yeah.
I just didn't know that.
So KKK says, oh, what a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cross. You know, I think I need to do some reading about DC, what's his name, who did Birth of a
D.W.
Nation?
Griffith.
Yeah.
I think the Birth of a Nation is based off a book called The Klansman, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
that's it. That's right.
With a C.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And
So
he was surprised that people had a bad reaction to it. He just thought,
Yeah.
what? Who is the problem with this?
Yeah, what's the problem? What's
And then
the
he
problem
made,
with
and then
that?
he made a really like a film that's way, way, way longer than this, called Intolerance, as a way of trying to make up for that. But the damage was very severe. I mean, this was a majorly, and for people who study film, this is a very important film because it really changed film language. It's an important film, and so we as people who teach film have this crisis. You know, it's, do we show a film like this and talk about what it did, or do we not show it? Do we show, you know, Leni Riefenstahl's films? I mean, and there are many things from which that are sort of like this, and it's a kind of moral dilemma. I mean, it's important to know the evil that's there, but it's not a good idea to keep watching it. I don't know what others have to think, but that is a forever a discussion in cinema studies and film production classes that we talk about.
Well,
yeah.
Ava in this film takes us, of course, after the Civil War. She gets us through the early 1900s, early part of the 20th century, and we get into lynchings. And I'll never get over those pictures with people standing around like, you know, a picnic with people hanging from trees dead. You know, I'll never get over that. So that, however, is my segue to Joyce and what she had to deal with in learning about that horrific crime in Jasper, which, you know, hand in glove racism to the point of, you know, we're going to snuff this man out and he didn't do anything wrong. So Joyce, how did learning about that particular lynching or that particular crime affect you in any way?
It forever changed me, changed my life. It changed my journey to justice, what I was working on. It just turned me around so completely and put me on another path. As you know, Michelle, I have said, working as a news anchor and reporter, I did not want to go to Jasper. I fought against it, and my news director said, well, you can go or you can be fired. I was always getting into trouble for referring to the murder of James Byrd Jr. as a modern day lynching. Come on, what else can you call it? That is exactly what it is. I called it that on the network. I called it that in every conversation that I've ever had about it. Finally, looking at George Floyd and where we are in this moment, the language has caught up and proven to be true. I was right. So many millions of people were right who said it. To be there on the road where this Black man was dragged for 3 miles behind a truck for nothing more than the color of his skin, how can you not be changed? And that affected my writing. It affected everything, my marriage, my family, my career. And I have always said I will carry James Byrd with me for the rest of my days.
I can understand that. It's a horrific crime. So we go through this lynching period, and I did some research. I think the first lynching started around, as indicated in the film, in the 1800s, and on into mid 20th century, like into the 60s, lynchings. Anyway, so the film makes it very clear that people had no problem, or some people had no problem with that. 79% of the lynchings happened in the South. Then Ava takes us in this film to the Jim Crow era. And of course, Jim Crow laws were state and local laws that made it absolutely perfectly legal to separate the races, the colored over here, the whites over here. Reaction, Linda, to Jim Crow laws and the fact that, well, we know how unfair it was, but what was your visceral reaction to the separation of anything but equal?
Well, I mean, it's part of a lived experience for me. I mean, I was in 10th grade when I went to an integrated school.
Wow.
I remember sitting in the balcony, or having to sit. I knew my mother never liked for me to go to the movies. You know, kids, we always love to go to the movies. And the
Sure.
balcony's really kind of a fun place to sit. So I would go to the balcony and go to the movies, but my mother never really cared for me to. She never really explained why exactly.
Yeah.
But, you know, in my lifetime, I mean, and I'm older maybe than most people probably on this stage. So, I mean, I've lived that. I know that.
It's funny, my mother never told me why we had to go to the balcony either. I didn't think I could think about it.
Yeah, I mean, there are
quality
things that
being
our
there.
parents protected us in a way. I mean, we lived in a Black neighborhood. I went to a Black school. My only experience with white people was seeing them on TV, or when we did go downtown shopping, we'd go to Joski's
But when you
sometimes,
saw Black people on TV,
you know.
were they bad people? Typically, yes.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was. I remember, you know, when you watched the 10 o'clock news at night, you worried, you hoped if there was something bad, if someone did something bad, please don't let it be a Black person, because
That was
if something happens,
Yeah.
it reflects on all of us. It's like, that's who we are. We're not able to be individuals. You know, it's a collective thing, where I think, and that's one major difference between Black people, you know, and white people in this country. You're able to be, as a white person, you can be an individual. When someone does something wrong, you don't feel it like you did it, or you somehow are responsible, or it's going to be held against you. And that's a whole, I mean, it kind of messes with your head in a lot of ways. I think this country, we have so much dysfunction around race.
Jasmine, let me ask you about being a little bit younger than, well, a
Yes.
lot younger. When you saw some of this imagery, Jim Crow, the lynching, but taking it up more modern day, as the film depicts, was any of that too hard for you to watch? Was any of that too hard for you to process because of your not being directly affected by it in terms of living it? You know, reading about it is one thing, but was it too hard to process at all?
It wasn't hard to process. I'm aware of the history of lynching. And I would say that what we see today on social media with the videos of police killings being shared virally, I would say that that would be the equivalent of seeing a postcard of a lynched man or woman.
Yeah.
It's hard. Like I didn't, you know, I didn't live through Jim Crow or segregation, but I've studied history, and I grew up in the South. I grew up in Florida, and my grandparents are from Georgia. And so they've talked to me about situations that have occurred in our own family. My aunt, because also when we talk about, you know, history, we talk about it as if it just happened and then it finished, you know, but there are people like, you know, Linda, who lived through it and are still here today. You know, my aunt talks about being in kindergarten and having to run from white mobs after school, her and her brothers. So, I mean, these are things that they're always difficult to watch, but they're especially difficult to know that they've actually happened and are happening. That's, I think, what makes it just as hard to view.
Could I mention one thing?
Yes, of course.
While you were talking about this, I was just checking the news to be sure, but that missing soldier from Fort Hood,
Yeah.
he was found hanging in a tree.
Oh, wow.
Today, August 26th.
There have been a number
He's
of
Hispanic, and I don't know if there's something, if he was gay or not, but he allegedly reported sexual abuse before his disappearance. Today, he was hanging in a tree.
That's how they found him. How often have we heard about kids who, I say kids as in college kids, think it's funny to create a noose and leave that around for a Black student or fellow student to find, and they think it's funny? Or how about the race car driver? Remember the professional race car driver? There was a noose hanging right by his garage door.
And a lot with LGBTQ people as well too.
Oh yeah. Now
there have been a number of these. Excuse me. I was going to say there have been a number of these murders where they found Black people and Hispanic people who are hanging. They're ruled as suicides.
But are they really?
We know, right?
Yeah.
Which we know to question that. But yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, there's
happening.
a film, if anyone gets a chance to see it, it's a documentary called Always in Season.
Oh.
That really deals with the whole thing of lynching and even modern day, because it started with the story of a young man that was found hanging. And, so there's even a question that this is still continuing on today.
Yeah, I just made a post that is going to be on Independent Lens this next season on PBS. That Always in Season. It's very powerful. I saw a screening of it the other day.
So let me move you to a little more modern day. So Bart, one of the things that I think it was Newt Gingrich, which I was surprised he was in this film. Newt Gingrich said 95% of the prosecutors in this country are white. So it's like, okay. And then somewhere in that mix, Ava makes us aware that when cocaine became a problem or a drug problem, people with cocaine issues typically being white, and then when crack came out of that, supposedly, or the thinking was that that was more of a Black drug use. So people who were arrested for crack, being Black, had longer prison terms or prison sentences than the cocaine user who was treated with, now, let's not do that. And, so Bart, what's your thinking about that? What do you remember about that time? Were you aware that the sentencing was so disproportionate between Black users of cocaine of crack and white users of cocaine?
Art, you're muted.
Oh.
We can't hear you.
Art, you're muted.
Yes. Okay. I'm sorry. I muted myself because I thought I should, and I forget. This is why I hate to mute myself, because I always forget. So yes, absolutely. I remember those days very well. People used to say cocaine was God's way of telling you make too much money. And it was all of these rich kids mostly, and people in the entertainment business, and they were doing an awful lot of cocaine, and very few of them went to jail. Many of them did damage to their lives. They totally would shoot their TVs, run through money, and do sort of personal damage, but they were not put in jail.
No.
Crack cocaine, completely different story. It's so obvious as the nose in your face, and it was very clear back then. Everybody kind of knew that was the story, and it's just very sad. It was the war on drugs was really horrible. It was horrible from the beginning, and it's a way to say, hey, we're protecting you, we're going to make the world better, and we're just going to help these people. And the damage was just incredible. It was really insane, very mean-spirited, very wrong-headed, and the damage is for generations of people of color were imprisoned and changed their family dynamic. And, it's incalculable what that damage was.
Over and over again. So the film tells us, or makes it very clear, the federal crime bill, which Bill Clinton pushed and later recanted or realized, oops, that wasn't such a good idea. But if you remember, those of you old enough to remember, the federal crime bill put out mandatory sentences, which of course disproportionately affected Black defendants or people who were accused of a crime and indicted. And then there was the 3 strikes, you're out. So someone might face life in prison for a certain amount of crack. And then what was the other thing? See, mandatories. Oh, it basically took away from, as the film shows us, any kind of opportunity for judges to make their own decision about a particular situation. They had to follow this law. So that also helped the mass incarceration component that was deadly to the Black family, to, how many kids, I forgot what the statistics, grew up without a father, for example. I think it's like 1 in 4 or something like that, grew up without a father in the Black community because the father was in prison for even the smallest, especially if it was the 3rd strike. So that made it very clear that all along it was never going to be fair. What is fairness? Yeah, what's fairness? Anybody else have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I have something to say about this. What is it about the South that in order to win the presidency, you have to do all these things over and over, the Southern strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And here comes Clinton from the South trying to say, oh, I'm not like those other Democrats. We're just going to do these things. And that allows him to be elected. There are a lot of states in the United States, but the South, what has happened in the South and the power that they've had, mostly from voter suppression, so African-American people of color not voting, has held an enormous amount of power in electoral politics. And I've never understood that. There are a lot of people in the Northeast. There are a lot of people in the Midwest. There are a lot of people in the West. Why is it that the white people in the South control what happens for who gets to be president? And that's why Clinton had to do that.
Yeah, he did.
He needed to win, and he felt that that's what he had to do to win.
And he sold his soul in doing it.
Yes, absolutely.
He sold his soul in doing it.
I don't know if this is an answer, but I just want to say one thing about Birth of a Nation. That set a standard, not only in film, but it set a standard in the criminalization of Black men.
Yeah.
And when you start there, everyone looked to that model. How can we continue to criminalize Black men, brown men, poor people that we need for this system to make prison work? So what you saw over and over and over were the stereotypes. You talk about the South and why people want to pacify or please the South. It goes all the way back to the Civil War, why we have needed to please the South. And I think that with Bill Clinton signing the crime bill in 1994, pushing that through, he wanted to make sure he was looking tough on crime. It goes all the way back to Birth of a Nation. It goes back to the criminalization of Black men. How do we make them, and the media participated with the descriptions that you would see of the oversexed Black brute, the rapist, the cartoon character. And Ava DuVernay did a wonderful job of pointing all of this out so that you would understand how these stereotypes figure into film, how they figure into media, how they figure into presenting us, so that we were constantly, I say we, Black people were perceived as a threat, a criminal threat, a danger to everyone, everywhere they were.
Well, how many times, if I'm talking to, let's say, a white person and we're getting into a conversation, and I've done this just kind of, you know, as a little test, and I'd say, if a Black man is walking down the street, are you likely to cross the street, or are you likely to stay on the street, stay on the same side of the street, and just pass him like anybody else? And oftentimes when I do that, it's like, well, I'd probably cross just to be sure. So, you know, what is that? Where does that come from? And when I've been in that situation, I'm thinking, you know what? I don't care if he does look like, you know, a badass. I'm still going to stay on the side of the street. I'm just not going to move. But there are, you know, too many times that I've asked friends, white friends, what would you do? And, you know, that's their answer, and they think it's okay. They think that's okay.
Well,
and to piggyback off.
Well, go ahead, Jasmine.
Oh, no, I was just going to piggyback off of what Joyce was saying about how Birth of a Nation and news media criminalize Black men and even Black women. But when you do these things like criminalize, you're taking away the humanity. So when you have like the war on drug policies, it's easy to instill those policies and convince people to vote because they already are, you know, have been instilled in them that Black people are violent by nature. And so the war on drugs, right, and the war on drugs, it wasn't kind of like a fluke that it affected Black people disproportionately. It was by design. And even in the documentary, I think it was Lee Atwater was caught on tape.
Yes.
Saying that, you know, this is going to affect the Black people this way. So all of these things are very intentional. And I think what's back to the initial question is what struck me the most is how organized the oppression is, because oftentimes we're talking about it's like, oh, it just happened to disproportionately affect Black people, but no, this is by design.
By design. And you know, the designers we learn in the film, it's called ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, whereby politicians and corporations get together, and I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. And they, this silent group that started in 1990, have been collectively getting together and deciding how, in essence, the minority component of our society is going to be treated or being allowed, what kind of freedoms, essentially. And I guess I felt really stupid. I'd never heard of ALEC. Now I feel like, where have I been? Where have I been? So they have been behind the scenes creating these constraints for people of color. And, you know, good on them, because it certainly worked to their benefit. Just as Jasmine said, Lee Atwater got caught on tape talking about, you know, let's do this.
And because the prison system is so privatized, the way the economic model is set up, you have to have people, you have to have bodies in there. So,
oh, the private prison?
Yeah, the private prisons. And now with the immigration detention centers on the border, it's the same situation.
Yeah, that was pretty scary also to see that how many private prisons started popping up, I guess, mid-90s into the early 2000s. Well, they can't be empty. You've got to fill them up. And then, of course, in filling them up, the ALEC people would say, well, we're giving jobs to security or guards, you know, don't we get credit for that? So that became just like a poison that has seeped through. I guess ALEC still exists, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure they're still.
We showed a film about ALEC. Was it 2 years ago, Raquel? That who made it? But there was a documentary made about them, about who they are and what kind of influence they have. So
I know the Walmart family is involved, or at least was involved, because remember, Walmart used to sell long guns at Walmart. You know, you pick up your garden tools and, oh yeah, let me pick up a long gun as well. And now they don't sell long guns, but I think that was probably a marketing ploy or a PR ploy to not look so, I don't know, look so bad in the scheme of things because of all the gun violence. Okay, so we've got Stand Your Ground. Oh no, I wanted to mention SB 1070. SB 1070 gave police the right to stop anyone if you look like an immigrant. How's that for Welcome to America? So the film brings us into basically where we are today. If you look like an immigrant, I have the right to stop you if I'm a law enforcement officer because you look like you don't belong here. Now, that is right out of the president's playbook. Right out of
Michelle, but this is Harrison, but that's no different than after Reconstruction that basically said if you were a runaway slave, and it started off with the slave owners and their friends hunting you down, then they went to bounty hunters, and then it went to some form of legal police type of relationship that basically that if you look like a slave, I have the ability to and the authority to pass illegally to stop you and frisk you. And by the way, if you don't have papers, even if you're in Philadelphia, I can drag you back to the South. It's the same thing.
Remember the movie 12 Years a Slave?
I do.
Yeah, he was a concert violinist or something. I mean, you know, he was a free man, had a life, a wife and children. And when these guys stopped him and he didn't have papers, he's been free. He's got a home. 12 Years a Slave. I think that was probably based on a true story. I don't know. Anybody else?
It is.
True story.
Anybody else have any thoughts about this SB 1070 law giving police the right to do that?
I think you have to sort of go back to, it's like, so why? And I think it really comes back again to Birth of a Nation, where you get the idea that Black men are scary. That's where that image is sold, and it's ingrained in a kind of spirit, and culturally it's been ingrained for a long time.
Those detention centers are now being privatized, and they're being run by the same people that are running this prison. And the other thought is that the dehumanization of the brown immigrants is exactly what happened in slavery times, because they had absolutely no qualms about separating mothers from their children. And they're doing the same thing now because they don't see them as human.
Yeah, just imagine a family coming here because of severe hard issues or whatever they're dealing with, and it's a full family unit, or it might be a mother and a child, and by the time it's all done, that child is considered an orphan, never to see their parents again or their mother again, and put up for adoption. It just, I mean,
and these are the same people that say that they believe in family values.
Yeah, of course, and go to church every Sunday.
Can I just say that I hear people say this to me over and over, that what do we do, Joyce? The criminal justice system is broken. No, it's not. It's working exactly as it was intended to work. It consumes us. It consumes poor people, mentally ill people, Black people, brown people. So it is working precisely as it was intended to, going all the way back to convict leasing, to mass incarceration right now. It is not a broken system. We have to stop saying that. And I really think watching 13th, Ava DuVernay made that clear. The system works exactly the way they intended it to. Our response to it must be, how do we repair? How do we heal? How do we get restorative justice for everyone and keep people out of that system? Because once you get in, it is hard. It is extremely difficult to get out of that system once you're in it. So it's working the way it's supposed to.
I think what we're seeing now with the protests in response to the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor is we're seeing people talk about defunding and dismantling, because there have been instances where the systems have been reformed, and we're seeing the same thing over and over again. And I think what we saw with 13th is that history is not just repeating itself. History is evolving, because I mean, essentially you would have to stop doing something and, to repeat itself. So they're changing the names. Like, it's not slavery, you're a felon, you're a convicted felon, right? There was a gentleman someone was saying, like, they're taking immigrant babies away, just like they took, the babies of enslaved mothers and fathers. It's the same thing, and it keeps continuing to happen over and over again because it never really stopped and it has never really been addressed.
And who would have the guts to do the addressing? I mean, if the very people who are doing these deeds or putting the system, making sure that the system continues to perpetuate, they're certainly not going to help. They're not going to try to solve it.
Right.
And if you try to be that person or that group to try to solve it, you'd be considered radical or left wing or
I think you're
Antifa.
seeing few heroes. You're seeing a few people like Brian Stevenson with his Equal Justice Initiative. I think you're seeing heroes step up and say, okay, when we read Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, it woke a lot of people up who knew nothing about this. Mm-hmm. So we see people coming to the forefront saying, I'm going to contribute what I can contribute. Working with the Innocence Project as the first non-lawyer on the board of directors gave me an education that blew my mind, because I'm coming in contact with men who have no business being in prison. If you're wrongly convicted, that adds another layer, an innocent person someplace they have no business being. So just talking to these men, learning how to change laws. So I do think we have people stepping up. We do have innocence projects in every state now. We do have organizations that are doing this tough work. We need a new public defender system. And I think that is going to be a huge help. Instead of throwing inexperienced lawyers at poor people who can't afford it, they're going straight to jail, and for a very long time. So I think with the new public defender system, I think with these groups doing the work, I think when you see more education about it, when we saw Just Mercy, well, I read the book years ago, but a lot of people are talking about the film and also talking about films like that. It was wonderful to see Brian Stevenson also be in Ava's 13th.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when you were mentioning earlier about a broken system, and it's not broken, it's working exactly as it was meant to. Ava takes us into the story of Khalif Broader. Do you remember him? He was only,
yes.
he was accused of, I don't know.
Stealing a backpack. He was accused of stealing a backpack.
Yeah,
and
accused of stealing a backpack.
For 3 years, years waiting on trial.
Yeah, and he pissed them off because he wouldn't take a plea deal.
That's right.
As we learned from the film, many people will take a plea deal because they don't want to go to trial for fear that they would be taken or put in prison for a long time. But he decided, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait. I'm going to go for the trial. And the 3 years, as Joyce said, and it just broke my heart to hear what happened to him. Talk about broken spirit.
Yes.
And they put him in solitary confinement for 2 of the 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
22 years old, and he kills himself. His mind was, completely blown by the system and what they did.
So when he wasn't getting beaten by other prisoners, Khalif was being beaten by guards. So there's this whole corrupt system within the system. And it's such a heartbreaking story to see this teenager, a baby, in with hardened criminals. What do we expect is going to happen when we put children in prison with hardened criminals who probably, some of them definitely should be there? That's what prison is for. But when we put babies, and this was a crucial part of Just Mercy, if you read the book, Brian Stevenson argues about what happens to juveniles. They disappear. We don't even want to talk about it because they are the Khalif Browders of the world. And we saw what happened to him.
And the Central Park Five, if you remember them too.
Oh, yeah.
And what happened with them. It's just unconscionable.
The fact that they could even be contributing citizens after what they've gone through. I mean, the fact that they can string a sentence together after being in prison, knowing all the while as children being put in a prison system and not doing the crime that they're accused of. It blows me away that they've come out on the other side, but I'm sure they've had to have counseling and, reacclimation into
something
society.
Something else that was brought up in the film is
Yeah.
after they get out, no one's going to hire them.
No.
You know, it's almost impossible
Yes.
for them to find.
It follows you.
So
Yes, it
it's
does.
already been stacked against them.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really curious, in the time we have left,
Oh,
the protests that have been going on for the last, what, 2 months now?
yeah.
It seemed to me that if things were ever going to change, that this was a moment when things were possible to change. That there were more people out in the streets continually protesting, and the consciousness about at least police brutality against people of color was really starting to permeate the national conscience. And if there was a time when something could change, it seemed that this might. I'd be really curious what you all think about the possibility of change at this moment.
I've been wanting to say, speaking of the moment, because I just mentioned today finding the guy hanging in the tree. Are any of you aware, or most of you aware, that the fires being fought in California, a lot of that is prison labor?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
they were released from prison because they were afraid they were all going to get COVID-19.
Yeah.
And then the people who were supposed to fight the fires were released from prison because they were worried about COVID. So they didn't have enough prison labor to fight the fires. And there were a whole bunch of legislators pissed off about that.
Because
So yeah, if you can't lose your life one way, lose it another way. Oh no, we can't let them go and just be safe, you know. And most of these people who go out and do that have minor offenses as well.
And you
So
know
that was interesting. That is actually today.
Oh yeah, and you know that when that offender is out of the prison system, they can't get a job as a firefighter.
Right.
It's so absurd.
Isn't it crazy? It's
What do you say?
So
I think to answer Bart's question,
yeah.
I think I grew up in the South, and it's a very difficult thing when you understand what is at the basis of most of this is economics. So growing up in the South, one of the things I noticed is that when I started asking people how they were doing under a segregated environment, which I grew up in, there was a very thriving Black community. But everybody wanted to be part of mainstream society, and they wanted integration to take place because they felt like if integration took place, they would be, you know, part of the broader community. Well, what I saw 10 years later, you may have to mute, honey. What I saw 10 years later was that almost all the Black businesses.
Oops.
We lost you, Harry.
Harry.
Linda, can you you muted Harry maybe?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry. But what happened when the businesses left, then the communities began to suffer. But then what I noticed is that whenever in a small southern town, which some of you may have grown up in, the question became, who are you? Who is your father? Who is your uncle? Who is your aunt? Because people had a way to keep track of you, right? To say, well, are you one of those militants? Or are you creating problems, right? So I think some of what we see today, if you look at America, only 1.5% of all the businesses in America are Black owned. Yet the Black population is 14 to 15%. So when as I told a friend of mine, when you look at that, you can't even buy a pack of bubble gum if you have 1.5% ownership, right? Which means you have no property, you have no real right to advocate because you don't have the financial means, which we notice that a lot of people that are incarcerated can't even pay their bail.
Yeah, that's right. And they'll just sit there in prison until you know, their number is called, but what that does to them while they're in prison is something to worry about. So Bart, I'm not sure about the time. If you're, are we close? Should I wrap up questions? Where are you?
Yeah, I just sent you a note saying we should probably wrap this up. We try to keep these to about an hour. And by the way, we will post this discussion on YouTube, so you'll be able to watch it. So yeah, I want to thank all of you for the discussion. I thought it was really quite important and timely. I just want to say thank you all for coming. You have the link. Every Wednesday night at 7:30, we have another film. Next week, we're doing Picnic at Hanging Rock. Is that right, Raquel? With
no, that's the week after. The next week is the trans documentary with the director. Sam.
Right, with the director. And sometimes we have the director of the film with us as well. And then the Pick and Hang Rock is with Peter Simic, who writes for D Magazine. So that'll be the week after that. And the week after that, who knows if we're still living. But there is one thing I did want to mention. The first episode of Frame of Mind, the TV show that I produce for KERA, will show 40 years of how the Dallas-Fort Worth has dealt with issues of race. And it starts with a film that was made in the 60s called Dallas at the Crossroads by the Citizens Council.
Oh, boy.
And it has Walter Cronkite in it telling why Dallas should integrate peacefully because it would be bad for business.
Walter!
Yeah, so anyway, that's September like 24th,
September 24th.
24th, and it's definitely an episode on 10:30 on KERA. So that's something you should definitely check out. And that's the series is it's a series of Texas independent film. And so do the rest of you want to talk about what's going on? Linda, you have some things happening. You want to sort of talk about them? And turn your mic on. Turn your mic on.
Turn your mic on.
Turn your mic on.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Just wanted to remind everybody, our festival is going to be January 27th through the 31st, 2021. So get that on your calendar. We're planning right now. It looks like it'll probably be a hybrid festival with in-person and we hope and a virtual aspect to the festival. I want to invite you all to please follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and subscribe to our newsletter. You can go on our website for that. And also we have a YouTube channel. We have an upcoming program on September 2nd for the documentary that's coming out. We have a conversation. In fact, Michelle is hosting the conversation with Melissa Haslip, who's the director, writer,
Right.
and just an amazing woman. Bart knows her. He's interviewed her before, and we've both, at both our festivals, we've shown the film Mr. Soul, and it'll be coming out this Friday, the 28th. And I believe both Bart and I, both Dallas Video Fest and Denton Black Film Festival, you can screen the film through one of us. And we appreciate it because it supports our festivals.
It's a story about a TV show that most of you don't know anything about and was incredibly awesome and very powerful. And in terms of what we're talking about today about changing the image from Birth of a Nation, it's this kind of show, Mr. Soul, that can really start to do that.
Yes, I agree.
All right. Anything else? Anybody got anything else they want to talk about that's coming up?
It was nice to meet everybody.
I do. I would like to, I'm not sure how many Houston folks are on the Zoom, but I do want to plug Houston Museum of African American Culture. We do have a virtual box office and virtual events on our website. It's www.hmaac.org or hmac.org. So please subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on social media. If you ever find yourself in Houston on a Saturday, we have HMAC Movies at Sunset, which is basically a drive-in. So this weekend we're having The Hate You Give. Next weekend we're doing Do the Right Thing, and we'll be adding more titles to that program as well. So thank you for having me. This is really a great conversation.
It's great to meet you.
All right. So come back next week. It's great to have like intelligent conversation about film, particularly as craziness is happening. It's good to get together as community and, you know, like think about how we can change things.